Sorry for being late. I got lost.
That's fine. I've just arrived. How did you find your way?
Oh yeah, so there was a guy on the street and I asked him where am I and he responded, you're in the car.
Wait, I don't get it. How is that information helpful?
Well, I knew I was near Microsoft, because what that guy said was technically correct but completely useless.
Huh, that's quite interesting.
You know what else is interesting?
And what's that?
The message from our sponsor. This video was sponsored by Xiaomi originally, but I reject them for some reason, so this video doesn't have a sponsor. There's no doubt that computers are powerful. They allow people to do all kinds of things. However, due to this versatility, programs can sometimes be hard to use. It's easy to be overwhelmed by complex software if you don't have previous experience with it. This problem was even more severe back in the 90s when most people were using computers for the first time and were using them to do actual jobs instead of wasting time.
For many newcomers, PC stands for pain and confusion.
Naturally, Microsoft, the company that always trying to take things to the next level, made a major redesign to their user interface in 1995. That redesign becomes one of the most iconic Microsoft products. And yes, I'm talking about Microsoft Bob.
It's Bob. Welcome to the future.
Well, I gotta admit that Bob is more infamous than famous. It's a program that people absolutely love to hate. It's even rated as one of the worst tech products of all time. No list of the worst would be complete without Windows' idiot cousin, Bob. Ouch. What Bob did so wrong that people treated it like this? Was it really that bad? Well, time to go down the rabbit hole. Karen Fritz was a Microsoft researcher who had a background in business and psychology. Because she wasn't a programmer that lives in a dark cave and staring at the command line the whole day, she made some changes to make some Microsoft products more accessible to new users. She introduced the file creation wizard in Microsoft Publisher, which was the first ever Microsoft product that has this feature. But this couldn't satisfy Fritz. See, the user interface itself is still pretty blowed up and the toggles and labels are confusing for new users. Using a program like this is like walking in IKEA, it's impossible to not get lost in there. To solve this problem, Karen had her solution. Like in real life, users should be able to speak to the manager. To realize this amazing idea, Fritz spoke to Bill Gates and it went something like this. Sir, I have an amazing idea. How about we make a program so easy to use that even babies can use computers without any instruction? I love that idea. How many people do you need? 25. And how many Microsoft developers do you need to use a computer? What? I'm asking how many developers do you need to use a computer? One? That's right, because all the Microsoft developers are pretty skillful. You didn't laugh at my joke. Wait, that was a joke. I will only give you 3 people because of your bad taste. Oh, no. Unfortunately, Karen didn't get what she asked. But she's officially Karen the manager now. The project was developed under the name Data Wizard and later Utopia, a pretty ironic name for a company that was trying to turn 1994 into 1984. Knock knock, who's there? 2 professors from Stanford University, yay! Clifford Nass and Barry Reeves gave a speech at Microsoft which changed Bill Gates' mind. Gentlemen, I used to be a fan, but after watching your speech, I'm a whole air conditioner now. Gates finally agreed to give Fritz 25 people, which Fritz initially asked for. It's also at this time Melinda Gates, Bill's former wife, participated in this project. Take this, you outdated materials! And finally, the day had come.
This is Bob, the unassuming star of the Consumer Electronics Show. It's more than just a smiley face with glasses. Bob is actually Bill's latest contribution with friendly user interfaces and software integration.
In CES 1995, Microsoft introduced their latest and greatest next-gen user interface to the world. Some were excited, some were skeptical, but virtually all people agreed that the social interface was the future. Reviews at that time were surprisingly positive. What Bob will do is open up a lot of doors for people who might have been intimidated by computers. And arguably everyone's favorite comment. Bob is going to be another nail at Apple's coffin unless Apple can somehow raise the standard yet again on the easy-to-use front. Wow, strong words. Wondering how that goes. Nevertheless, as we know, Bob didn't go well despite being a product that technically people would love. No one was buying this potentially next-gen user interface. And just 1 year later, Microsoft ended support for Microsoft Bob and sold Bob.com domain to a person named Bob, marking Microsoft Bob as the first significant failure of Microsoft.
I can't believe you committed suicide. I cannot believe you committed suicide. How could you have done this? How could you have committed suicide?
So what happened? Let's find out. As legend has it, Bob was too stupid to make it on the show, so Tinky Winky and Dipsy had to live it in the Mamby-Pamby forest. As the saying goes, don't judge the book by its cover. But I will judge Bob's cover anyway because it's not a book. Introducing hardworking, easygoing software everyone will use. The online really shows the confidence of Microsoft, which makes sense. After all, Microsoft was the #1 developer even though Bob turned it out to be #2. And as you may or may not have noticed, this is the earliest abuse of Comic Sans. That's right, the famous Comic Sans was designed for Bob even though the font was not used in the actual product. Enough for the outside, let's get into the inside of Bob. Wait, that didn't sound right. Bob feels very different from other programs, begins with the installer. For example, on this page you need to click the Bob icon to move to the next step. Interesting design but not very consistent because literally on the next page it becomes a continue and on this page is an OK button. Classic Microsoft since 1995. This is another important part of the installation. It asks you, would you like Bob to start right after you start Windows? This shows the fact that Bob was an alternative Windows shell and it still somehow depends on Windows. After the installation, there is yet another setup process, which is really unnecessarily complicated. Bob tends to over-explain things. Like in here it says the asterisks are not my passwords. I can see how this can be helpful for people who are just using computers for the first time in their life. But before that, Bob had asked some quote-unquote advanced things like the installation path, which, just in case you don't know, is confusing for some university students these days. Crazy, right? And also, Bob asks for a lot of personal information like birthday, location, company, etc. Many people these days are criticizing big techs are asking too much personal data.
iPhone 12 Pro Max introduced an amazing advanced technology, censorship.
But you know what? It always has been like that. And it could get worse. At least these days you don't have to fill up your personal information manually, which is an annoying and unintuitive process in Bob. Bob is already annoying and unintuitive for people like me who have been using Windows for so many years. Imagine how you would feel when you bought Bob in the mid-90s. I know what you're thinking. If it looks like a kid's program, it feels like a kid's program, even talks like a kid's program, then it probably is a kid's program. However, Bob was not a kid's program. It comes with an email client and financial manager, which indicates that it was something that was meant to be taken seriously. But given its looks and feels, it's impossible for anyone to use it for actual jobs. I mean, like, no one would use a cartoon thing for their working devices, right? Despite being childish, Microsoft was still that Microsoft, so they put some random technology there. You can move and resize almost every object in this room, which is much more flexible compared to other similar programs at the time like GeoWorks. Speaking of resizing, maybe you have noticed that all objects in Bob are vector images, which allows it to run at 1080p natively. But interesting enough, Bob used dithering, a technique that makes an image seem more colorful by intentionally introducing noises. Now, this is not some obsolete technology, it's actually widely used today. However, it's usually used in bitmap images instead of the vector ones. Nevertheless, the technology didn't really translate to good user experience, mostly because it's dangerous to go alone, take this. The best quotes to summarize my feeling with the assistant is, maybe it's cute the first time, but silly the second time, and annoying destruction the third time. The virtual assistant in Bob is barely helpful. In fact, it's kinda on the opposite side. The design looks inappropriate for an office scenario, the animation is slow, and the interaction is also unnatural. Given how different it looks, you may think, well, Microsoft must have introduced some new ways of interaction, right? But under the new looking, there's nothing new. What Bob did essentially was to move all the controls, options, manuals into this tiny little talk bubble on the bottom right. And unlike tabs on Windows, there's no hotkeys. You can't hover on them to show the details, you have to click it. The most annoying part is a lot of talk bubbles cannot be ignored because Microsoft think it's that important. Above all, Bob didn't have multi-window support. How can I replace Windows if I can't have Windows?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
The Bob interface is 3,000 times or even 2,000 times worse than Windows in many ways. First, it's not really more intuitive for new computer users because they don't know what those options mean anyway. And after those users learn how to use those options, the assistant immediately becomes useless. Plus, as I said, without the multi-window support, the interaction can never be efficient. Above all of that, the development guide of Bob gives developers less freedom to develop programs and requires more art assets. Yes, Bob was not just a program, it was also a platform on which people can run their software. And yes, there were programs specifically designed for Bob, and they are GeoSafari and the Great Gradings. GeoSafari was that GeoSafari, and later Microsoft decided to ship Bob with GeoSafari because Bob cannot be even more like a kid's program. Great Gradings was the software for designing postcards, because apparently that was the thing in the mid-90s. And just like Bob, few people actually used these programs. So Bob was a failure, a bad implementation of a convincing theory, a history that Microsoft was trying to avoid. Or is it? It is sad that Microsoft Bob was not a visionary product of the company like MS-DOS, or a daring reformer of the interface like Microsoft Windows. DOS and Windows changed the world, but Bob didn't. Its impact, critics claim, was as modest as it was accidental. It simply played as a playground for an immature design, and enjoyed the good fortune of a growing company. That is the assumption. Here are the facts. As Gates said to Fritz, if Bob was a successful product, some elements of Bob would make their ways into the Windows. And by elements in Windows, Bob did. Not just the cute Robodog, but also Microsoft Actor, the technology behind Bob. And let's don't forget everyone's favorite assistant, Clippy. Just kidding, no one likes Clippy, but they did use the same technology. Believed to be a failure by the most, Microsoft didn't think that way. Even though the Bob was the same Bob, people have different opinion about it. So why is Bob not a failure? To understand that, we need to talk about social interface. Just like Windows allows developers to develop programs with graphical user interface, Bob, or Microsoft Actor for that matter, enables programmers to build social interface. Social interface is not a well-documented term, and because this term is mostly used in Bob, many just assume it refers to a house-like user interface representing like the real world. However, that is not the definition of social interface. In 1994, Fritz Nas Reeves, together with some other researchers, published a tutorial entitled Seductive Interface, Satisfying a Mass Audience. Even though this PDF only has 2 pages, it still cost me $15, which reminds me the old days and make me appreciate the random Indian guy on YouTube. Some of the design philosophies in this tutorial are surprisingly relevant, even to these days, and this paper is the earliest reference to the term social interface that I can find. Just like graphical interface refers to use graphics to interact with computers, social interface means use a social relationship to interact with the machine. A talk bubble in Bob certainly doesn't represent real-world conversation, but it's clearly more similar to a conversation compared to a random pop-up window coming out of nowhere. What is even more similar to a real conversation? That is apparently talk. In fact, in CES 1995, Gates showed a better implementation of the social interface right after the demonstration of Microsoft Bob.
You'll be able to talk to the machine, and it will use voice recognition or so-called natural language processing to be able to understand what you
Unfortunately, this demo didn't become an actual product because computers at that time were struggling to render the 2D vector images from Bob, not to mention the advanced features in this demo. But fortunately, the fundamental idea of social interface has never been thrown away. Today, you can invoke your voice assistant by simply saying "Hey Siri," which, just in case you don't know, was not initially developed by Apple and was an open platform. Maybe the only reason for the fall of Bob was, as Gates said, we were just too ahead of our time, like most of our mistakes. Technology at that time was just not good enough for social interface. One could argue that Siri is just Bob with a voice actor and no persona. Bob may be a failure, but it's still a failure that's changed the world, for better or for worse. Nevertheless, due to the unpopularity of Bob and Clippy, most tech companies have rejected the whole idea of virtual assistant with animated characters, which is a shame because I think the fall of Bob mostly comes from the way of interaction rather than the idea of a virtual character. めぐみはそう思うんでしょ?
いえ、その。
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, click like, get subscribed. It's really helpful because this is a really new channel. This video was really painful to make, not just because of the fact that there aren't a lot of information on the internet, but also the fact that there are so many random pieces of fun facts. There's a hidden room in Bob called Dream or Daydream, I'm not sure, but I couldn't, this is just like a random fact, I can't put it anywhere in this script. And there's also the fact that Bob had a proper user management system, which, believe it or not, was something that Windows didn't have at that time. So you can say, you know what, Bob actually had a better user management than Windows. Crazy. And, well, what else? Yeah, Bob was, as I said, Bob used the same technology as Office Assistant, right? So you can essentially drag and drop all the Bob files to the Microsoft Office and it works. It works! These are just random facts and probably no one cares, so I just delete them. I don't know how to end this video. Anyway, bye!